You told me I wasn't welcome at my own son's wedding anniversary dinner. Not as a guest, not as a plus one, not even as the man who had been quietly paying their mortgage for the past 4 years. I found out the way you find out most painful things in life, not from the person who should have told you, but from someone who assumed you already knew. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just gotten back from my cardiologist, the one over on Elmhurst Avenue, and I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot eating a granola bar because my wife used to say I needed to eat something after those appointments, and 31 years of her telling me that had turned into a habit I couldn't shake even though she'd been gone for 6 years. My phone buzzed. It was my grandson. He's 9. He texted me a string of emojis, a fork and knife, a birthday cake, some confetti, and then, "Grandpa, are you coming Saturday? Mom made a seating chart and I saved you the chair next to mine." I stared at that message for a long time. I hadn't been invited to any dinner on Saturday. I called my son. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted. Delivered. No response. I drove home, made coffee I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table the way I used to sit at that same table when I was trying to work through a problem. I'm an engineer by trade. Retired now, but the habit of sitting with a problem until it gives you something back, that never left me. So I sat, and I thought about the past few months. All the times my daughter-in-law had answered the phone when I called my son's number. The way she'd started referring to their house in conversation with other people. "Our home," she'd say. Like she'd built it with her own hands. The way my son had gotten quieter around me, more careful with his words. I thought about the envelope she'd slid across the table to me 8 months ago. Inside was a card, Christmas, with a cardinal on the front, and a note in her handwriting that said the family was simplifying, and they appreciated everything but they were in a good place now financially. My son had sat next to her and looked at the centerpiece the entire time. He hadn't said a word. I hadn't stopped the payments then. I don't know why. Maybe because the mortgage was something I'd set up 3 years before that, when they were behind. And my son called me in a panic at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. And I'd driven to their house and sat at their kitchen table. A different kitchen table. Same conversation. And I told him I wasn't going to let him lose the house. He cried. He actually cried. He said he didn't know what he would do without me. His wife had stood in the doorway in a robe and said thank you in a voice that already sounded like she was planning something else. So I kept paying. Because that's what you do. That's what I thought fathers were supposed to do. My son called me back on Thursday. 2 days later. He sounded rushed. He said the dinner Saturday was kind of a small thing to some of his wife's friends and a few of their neighbors, and that it had been her idea and she'd handled the invites, and he paused there and I heard her voice in the background, low, words I couldn't make out. He said he'd thought someone else had let me know. He said maybe we could do lunch the following week. Just us. Maybe that burger place on Route 9 I liked. I said okay. I didn't say what I was thinking. I was thinking you have never once in your 42 years on this earth called me to suggest lunch. Your wife is standing 3 feet away from you and you are lying to me in real time and we both know it and you're going to go on lying. Because that's easier than whatever conversation lives on the other side of the truth. I said okay, and I hung up and I went and stood on my back porch and looked at the yard. My wife had planted roses along the fence. I've kept them alive. Badly some years. But alive. I didn't sleep much that Friday night. Saturday came. I drove past their street on the way back from the hardware store. I wasn't looking for anything, I told myself. I just needed a drill bit and the route took me that way. And I saw the cars. 6, 7 cars parked along the curb in front of a house that I'd been paying for since October of 2021. String lights on the front porch my son had strung up last fall. A wreath on the door I'd never seen before. Through the window, through the gauze curtains my daughter-in-law picked out from that home store she loved, I could see people moving around, laughing, living. I kept driving. I got home. I sat in my truck in my own driveway for a while. My grandson texted again. "Grandpa, where are you? I saved your seat." That one got me. I won't pretend it didn't. I went inside and opened my laptop and pulled up the bank portal I'd been using to make the automatic transfers. I sat there with the cursor hovering over the account. I didn't cancel anything that night. I closed the laptop and I ate a bowl of cereal for dinner, and I went to bed at 9:15. Sunday morning, I called my accountant. His name is a name I trust, which sounds like a strange thing to say. but what I mean is that he's been handling my finances for 22 years, and he knew my wife, and he knew what I'd built, and he has a way of speaking to me that is direct, without being cold. He answered on the second ring, even though it was Sunday, and I told him what had been happening over the past several months, and he listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "You've been paying their mortgage out of your personal checking. That means you can stop whenever you want. No notice required." I said I knew that. He said, "So what are you waiting for?" I didn't have a good answer for that. Monday morning, I made a call to the bank. I spoke with a woman in the accounts department who was patient and professional and who walked me through the process of canceling the recurring transfer. It took 11 minutes. I thanked her. She said, "Have a nice day." I hung up and sat there and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not anger, just something quiet, like the space after you set down something heavy. My son called me Wednesday. Different tone this time. He said he'd gotten an email from the mortgage company, a missed payment notice, automatically generated. He said it must be a mistake. The payments had been automatic for years. Could I look into it? I said, "It's not a mistake." Silence. I said, "I canceled the transfer Monday morning." More silence. Then, "Dad, I know about the dinner," I said. I hadn't planned to say it like that, direct, but there it was. He started talking. He said it wasn't. It was just. His wife had thought. It was a small thing. He hadn't realized I wasn't. I let him finish. All of it. Every half sentence and backtrack and incomplete thought. Then I said, "You called me back 2 days after I first called you. Your son texted me to ask why I wasn't there. You told me it was a small thing and then you let me drive past the house and see the cars." He said he was sorry. I said, "I know you are." And that was true. I believed it. But sorry is a door and it doesn't tell you anything about what's on the other side of it. I told him I needed some time to think about what made sense going forward. He asked what that meant. I said I wasn't sure yet what it meant. What I'd been working through in my head for the better part of a week by then was something I hadn't told him, something I hadn't told anyone except my accountant, and later my attorney. 14 months earlier, my daughter-in-law had asked me to meet her for coffee, just the two of us. She'd chosen a place near her office downtown, one of those coffee shops that charges $9 for a latte and has no comfortable chairs. She'd been dressed like she was coming from a presentation. She was pleasant. She complimented my jacket. She asked about my health with the kind of precise warmth that I recognize now as strategy. About 15 minutes in, she slid a folder across the table. Inside was a draft deed transfer document. The house. She explained that they'd been thinking about long-term planning and that for estate purposes, it might make sense to formalize the property in their names since I was getting older, and she wanted to make sure there were no complications down the road. She'd had someone draw it up. She smiled when she said it, like this was something we were doing together. I took the folder. I thanked her for coffee. I told her I'd have my attorney look it over. She said, of course, no rush, just something to consider. I brought the folder to my attorney the next morning. He read it in about 4 minutes and then looked at me over his glasses and said, "She's asking you to sign over the deed to a house you own and are currently paying the mortgage on." I said I understood that. He said, "Don't sign this." I didn't sign it, but I also didn't say anything to my son about it. I kept paying the mortgage. I kept showing up for my grandson's baseball games and Christmas mornings and the occasional Sunday dinner where his mother was gracious and his father was relieved and everyone pretended the folder had never existed. What my daughter-in-law didn't know, what she'd never thought to check, because why would she? Because in her mind the house was already hers, was that I'd quietly begun a different kind of process 8 months before that coffee meeting. My attorney had mentioned, offhand, during a conversation about estate planning, that there were mechanisms for placing real property into a revocable trust in a way that protected it from certain kinds of claims. We talked about it in the abstract. After the coffee meeting, we talked about it less abstractly. The house had been in a trust for 11 months by the time she handed me that folder. She hadn't asked to see the deed, she'd assumed. That was her mistake. In the weeks after the missed payment notice, things move quickly in the way that financial reality tends to move when it stops being abstract. The mortgage company sent a formal notice. My son called me 3 times. My daughter-in-law called me once, the first time she'd called me directly in over a year, and her voice was different. The pleasantness was still there, but the warmth was gone, and what was underneath it was something harder. She said she was sure we could work something out. She said family was important to her. She said she hoped we weren't going to let a misunderstanding, she called it a misunderstanding, damage what we'd built together. I let her finish. Then I said, I think we should all sit down and have a real conversation. She agreed immediately. Yes, of course. Absolutely. She'd set something up. I called my attorney after I hung up and told him to be available. The dinner. They actually suggested dinner at their house, which I found interesting, was on a Thursday evening. My son had made pasta. He's a decent cook when he actually cooks. My grandson was upstairs doing homework and he came down to hug me when I arrived and held on a beat longer than usual, the way kids do when they can sense that something in the adult world is not quite right. We sat down. My daughter-in-law had a folder of her own this time. Printed emails, a timeline, a number, a figure she'd calculated for what I'd contributed to the household over the years, framed as though she was preparing to negotiate a settlement. I let her set it all out. Then I said, I want to talk about the trust. She didn't understand what I meant at first. My son didn't either. So I explained it, calmly. The way I used to explain load calculations to junior engineers. You start with the foundation and work up. I told them the house was not in their names. It had never been in their names. It was held in a revocable trust I'd established, and I was the trustee, and the beneficiary was my grandson. The folder in my daughter-in-law's hands went very still. I told them the trust had been set up with the guidance of my attorney, that it was completely legal and properly recorded with the county, and that the document she brought to coffee that day would not have transferred anything, even if I'd signed it, because the asset wasn't mine to transfer in the way she'd assumed. My son looked at his wife. My daughter-in-law looked at the table. I told them that the mortgage payments had come from me as a personal act of support, not as a legal obligation, and that I had every right to stop them, which I had done. I told them I still loved my son. I told them I still loved my son. I told them I intended to be in my grandson's life for as long as I had life to give, but I was done participating in arrangements where I was paying for something I wasn't welcome in. My son said, Dad, I am so sorry. Not the sorry from the phone call. This was different. This was the kind of sorry that comes from understanding, not from being caught. His wife said nothing for a long time. Then she excused herself from the table. My son and I sat there. The pasta got cold. He told me things I'd needed to hear for a long time, about how things had been at home, about the pressure he'd been under, about the night I'd sat at their table, and he'd cried in the way he'd let her rewrite that story over the years into something about weakness and dependency, until he'd stopped being able to tell the difference between what he actually felt and what he'd been told to feel. I didn't say I told you so. That's not the kind of father I want to be. I did say, you can always call me. That part hasn't changed. He nodded. He looked about 25 years old, sitting there. The kid who used to fall asleep on the couch watching baseball games. My grandson came downstairs at some point and asked if we were staying for dessert. I said I'd stay for dessert. He went and got the ice cream himself. Vanilla, which is the right choice, and I've always thought so. And the 3 of us sat at the kitchen table and ate ice cream, and my son talked to his son about the baseball season, and I just sat there and listened and thought about how strange and complicated and still somehow worth it is to love people. The trust remains in place. My grandson is the beneficiary. When the time comes, the house will go to him. Not as a transaction, not as something negotiated over coffee with a folder of documents, but as something a grandfather set aside because he wanted one thing in this world to be simple and clean and already done. My daughter-in-law moved out 6 weeks later. That was her choice, and I didn't comment on it. My son is still in the house. He's going to counseling, which I think is the bravest thing I've seen him do. He called me last Sunday just to talk. No agenda. No ask. We talked for 40 minutes about the old truck I'm restoring in the garage and a podcast he'd been listening to and whether the team was going to have a decent season. Just talk. The kind we used to have before everything got complicated. My grandson texts me every few days. Last week, he sent me a picture of a drawing he made. A house, a truck, a stick figure man with gray hair. Under it, he wrote, "This is you and your house, Grandpa." Then a smiley face. I printed it out and put it on the refrigerator, right where his grandmother used to put his drawings when he was small. Some things you keep, some things you let go, and some things you put in a trust and make sure they find their way to the right person.